Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to people joining us from around the world. I'm John MacArthur. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and senior advisor to the UN Foundation. I'm very pleased to be hosting, or pardon me, helping to moderate this Google Hangout that's hosted by the State Department. We have three extraordinary leaders with us today who are working on the policy, the communications and outreach and business side of the global sustainable development equation. And we're delighted to have the opportunity for a discussion with them and with you about how we might all think about these Sustainable Development Goals. First, we have Deputy Secretary of State Heather Higginbottom, who is here leading from the U.S. government side. Second, we have Richard Curtis, director of many of my most favorite films around of the past generation, and also the co-founder and leader of the Project Everyone effort for the global goals. And then third, we have Shamina Singh, who's the president of the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, been leading on many of the questions of private sector cooperation around these new sustainable development goals. So just for those who are new to the global goals conversation, there are 17 of these goals that were set last September at the United Nations. After a few years of global conversation, they were agreed with an agenda for 2030, tackling issues of people, planet, and inclusive prosperity. We're coming up next week to the first high-level political forum, which will be the first of the annual major checkpoints on progress for these new Sustainable Development Goals. And so our friends at the State Department thought that this would be a great chance to have a check-in, say, how are we doing? How can we understand these goals? How can we think about them? And how can we, most importantly, make progress moving forward? So with that, I'd love to hand it over first to ask each of the panelists a question, just at the most basic terms. How do you think about these goals and why are they important? Maybe Deputy Secretary Heather Higginbottom, can we start with you?
Sure, John, thank you very much for moderating today. This is a great opportunity. And the global goals are so exciting because they provide a roadmap for how we can eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. And this is an agenda that can unite everyone and bring people together all around the world. And as you said, there's 17 goals, and whether you're focused on gender equality or food security or climate change or good governance and transparency, there are goals the whole world, 192 nations adopted in New York, and we have a vision for the future. And so I hope that through today's Hangout and other efforts like Project Everyone's efforts, that people can come together and raise awareness and get involved in this process.
Fantastic. Richard, you've spent a huge amount of time thinking about how to describe and explain these goals. What do they mean to you?
Well, I mean, I think my description has been that we want to be the first generation to end extreme poverty, the last generation to be threatened by climate change, and the most determined generation to end injustice and inequality. And what I find so exciting about the goals really is that they're a plan. I think what happens, particularly for young people, is they think, well, I can fight a bit for this, I can fight a bit for that, and then they get demoralized by the fact that there are so many other problems they can't give time to. And what I love about these, in a way, what I love about the inelegance of there being 17 goals is because it is a complicated world. They do all interact with each other, but they give a real sense that if we make solid progress in each one of them, that you will end up with that great achievement for a great generation. And what I'm trying to do at first is to try and make the goals famous, to try and make them part of a dialogue, so that whenever anyone is negative or worried about something, you say, well, actually, look, there is a plan, and also there is progress being made every single year, and look what we're doing here. And if you get a business, or if you get an individual, or if you get a country, they've got a way of looking at what they're working on and seeing how it fits in with this universal plan. And I think it's massively important politically, but also it's important socially, because I don't think you can fight for your rights unless you know what they are. And so that's why I feel as though it's important to communicate them, to let people know about them, and to make people enthusiastic about them, which is why these images that I've got behind me are so colorful and have so very few words in order to make them both sort of energetic and communicable. We want to make them famous, and then we want to get them finished.
Thank you, Richard. And Shamina, you come at this from the hard-headed business angle, but hard-headed, big-hearted. How do you think about these issues from the Mastercard perspective? Oh, I'm afraid we don't seem to have sound with Shamina still. We have a technical glitch there. I'm sorry. Okay, so we're going to see. We're going to try to fix that, and then we'll come back to more. Shamina's got a crucial voice on this, so we certainly want to hear from her. But we're going to just work on that in the background. So I guess the next question is just as we think about progress to date so far, we're now 6 months into this new agenda, so we're 1/30th of the way to the deadline on 2030. How do each of you think about what's happened so far? So from the U.S. government side, Heather, what's happened so far, and what are the first steps of getting going here?
It's a great question, John. First of all, we've been working on a lot of these goals and priorities for years, and it's exciting that now we have this common framework for the whole world. So some of the steps that we're taking, we're working with our diplomats and our development professionals that are posted all around the world and that engage with governments all the time, and using the goals as a common framework to align our policies, our resources, our priorities. And we're also taking steps to ensure that as we make commitments looking forward, either funding commitments or targets or goals, they're aligned with this framework. And we think it's really, really important now that, as Richard mentioned, we have this map on these very important, interrelated, complex issues of how to move forward. And so within the U.S. government, we're aligning ourselves, and we're also really focused, as many other governments are and other organizations, on data. These goals allow us to mark progress, to hold ourselves and our partners accountable, and to show how all kinds of organizations, private sector, NGOs, other governments can plug into this roadmap. And to do that, we have to show the progress that we're making, the investments that we're making, the priorities that we have. And so we're trying to join with partners to really expand our own capacity for data and transparency, and also build the capacity of other partners as well.
Great, and so helpful to hear about the landscape of things, Heather, and also how I think this point you made is important about it's not just about new goals, it's about how all these activities fit into this agenda, because these goals, from my perspective, really articulate a lot of the issues that people already feel they're working on and sense are important. So it's about how to pull it all together as much as establishing a new vision. How about from your side, Richard? You guys have already had some landmark successes in the communications piece of this puzzle. Can you say a little bit about why you're doing this as someone who doesn't need to be in this area of business? Why are you spending so much time on this, and how are you measuring, based on your creative brilliance, the early gains?
Well, look, some people would say that it's a wonderful relief for the world that I'm not writing any more films. They're absolutely thrilled that I've moved over to something more worthwhile. Look, just because we've got someone from the State Department there, the global food security thing was an amazing achievement. It's wonderful to see America doing that. And Heather and I were just talking about the president talking about malaria in his State of the Union address, and suddenly there's a feeling that malaria might get wiped out, which is something that I was fundraising for ages, and now the idea that politics and business and everyone is fighting in that area, and the UK has just given another 100 million to girls' education. I mean, the thing that I'm excited about, particularly this year, is trying to get young people and all the new media as well to become involved and excited. We did this video in the last few weeks, which was a kind of reshoot of the Spice Girls song Wannabe. And I think we just yesterday heard that 100 million people had watched it on Facebook. And most of these people probably are young girls who are really passionate to get out there and fight about this issue. And I love the idea that they now know that their actions are identified with the goals and actually with what the State Department's doing, is the same as what they're arguing about in school with their friends who say they don't want to be feminists. So my job at the moment is I'm trying to turn the icons into outcomes, as it were, trying to work out a way of showing progress and making progress exciting. And one of the reasons, for a thing like this is to try and get people engaged at the beginning so that there can be a deadline in 2020. I think it'll be, 2020 vision. Let's look and see whether or not we're really doing well and have cleared it up. And then a real deadline in 2025 when you see where we've got to and how we've got to fight for those things. So I'm trying to get a clear, catchy way of making the statistics and making the progress known and famous so that we can create a real dynamic for change by 2030.
It's interesting, Richard, as you talk about this progress, and even under the Obama administration's leadership on many key issues. So it was January 2013 where, in his State of the Union, where he first called for the end of extreme poverty within a generation, which was crucial to the lead up to the adoption of that goal globally. Similarly, it was even under President Bush, of course, that the malaria control effort was first launched in 2005. 10 years later, we see that the end of malaria is the stated ambition of the subsequent president. So there is a long legacy aspect to these, many years in the making. But also, I think this piece on the gender equality and the extraordinary video you guys just made is crucial because it draws attention to the universality of this agenda. This is about girls everywhere and women everywhere. It's not just in any single part of the world.
I think that's true. And one of the great things, by the way, was Obama saying at the UN when they were launched that he was going to make sure these goals applied to the United States as well as applying to, Zambia and Colombia.
Yeah.
That is such an important point. These are universal goals, and we are working. I'm at the State Department. I'm talking about what we're doing internationally, but we've got a whole effort domestically as well to show how we're mapping to the goals and the work that we're doing. And that's an exciting part of this. And the other point Richard was talking about, reaching young people and the goals being sort of accessible. And I love that because it's going to take younger people with their innovation, their creativity, their ideas, everybody coming together, not just governments. And so reaching out to them and engaging them is so important.
And I was very pleased even when President Obama gave a major address to the Canadian Parliament just a couple of weeks ago. The SDGs were a major theme in his speech, very broad-ranging speech there too. Now I see Shamina's back on. Shamina, I just want to check.
Yeah, can you hear me or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Goodness, yes.
Good.
So happy to have you. Shamina,
well, listen, I just
touch us up.
Yeah, I want to thank, listen, I'm just so honored and privileged to be here with you all today, and I'm a big fan of the Spice Girls video and have taken the liberty of, posting it both on my personal accounts and obviously on the MasterCard accounts. But the best way to describe the work that we're doing here, because of the leadership of people like you, and John, especially you, I mean, thank you so much for all of the help that you've given to us in the private sector and MasterCard. It's a real opportunity that the private sector, and I sort of say the private sector knowing full well that nobody thinks of themselves as a public sector person or a private sector person or a citizen sector person. We just think of ourselves as citizens on the planet who are all trying to figure this out together. And I think that's what has excited and captured the imagination, not only of all of us on the Hangout today, but frankly, my colleagues from across the industries. And so I think the global goals really represent the first and best chance for all of us to sort of take off our individual pins, if you will. I've got my global goal pins on today, but take off our pins and sort of say, today it's MasterCard using all of our assets, working alongside Unilever using all of their assets, working alongside other companies using their assets, in close partnership with organizations like the State Department and the United Nations to achieve actionable, real change for the world. I mean, it's an exciting time to be part of the solution, really.
And it can't happen without business, can it? I mean, that's the truth. It's so interesting to me. When I was campaigning for the G8 conference in 2005, we couldn't really engage business. It was quite interesting. They thought development was still a kind of vaguely radical left-wing thing. It was quite hard, and the conversation has completely, spun around to realizing that it's business that gives jobs and that it's business that has the power to change things, and that's why we want to make it a popular thing for business. We just sent a letter from all the UN advocates, of which I'm the least glamorous, and Lionel Messi is the dodgiest, and Shakira is the most attractive. But we're just asking all business leaders, to have a board meeting about it, to tell their shareholders about what they're doing, to include the global goals marks, on their letterheads, to get in touch with all their employees. And I think that this is an opportunity always to just reignite all the brilliant things that businesses are doing within their communities and within the way that they work, and make it more understandable and not like a sort of charitable little office, but right into the center of business. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I think it's I think that's, and honestly, I appreciate it, but I actually think that's the easy stuff, right? So all of the stuff around visibility and contacting employees and briefing our boards and things like that, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the work that I've seen happening across the private sector, those are the table stakes. The real work comes in when we're actually using business core assets to get the job done. So to the extent that at my company, for example, but certainly not by ourselves, and certainly we're not happening in isolation, this is just an example, we've committed to using MasterCard's payment network, technology, data, certainly philanthropic investment, but also expertise to make sure that we're engaging in the places that we do really well. So for us, obviously goal 17 around partnership, gender, poverty alleviation, those are places where a technology company like ours can actually help do the work and move the needle around things like financial inclusion, payment technology, providing the infrastructure to make sure that as the initiatives roll out from other private and public partnerships, that we're there working alongside, using our core business capabilities to ensure active execution and implementation. So yes, visibility, doing it, done, happy to do more, but really focusing on using our core capabilities to really get the job done, and incredibly excited about it.
When you think about that from the government side, and you think about the capabilities and expertise that the private sector has, and what we couldn't and shouldn't build ourselves, or wouldn't have the capacity for necessarily, the fact that we can partner, whether it's supply chains, the technology that Shamina was just talking about, so critically important. We had a conversation here at the State Department a week or so ago on the future of development finance. How is it going to look in the future? And it's not going to look like the last 10 years or the last 20 years. It's going to look increasingly like it's built on partnerships, and it's bringing private flows and public together and leveraging and bringing the assets that we have for all the reasons, both because we want to make the world a better place, but because there's interest in it for all of us. And I think that's a really exciting future, and the global goals are right at the center of that.
I think this is so important, and one of the big sets of questions here is that there are some issues of these global goals that are around things like service delivery. How do you get the products or the services to places that need it? Sometimes the government is definitely going to do that, but a lot of times, if not most of the time, that's going to be because a business is delivering that. And in a lot of areas, we need businesses to reach new frontiers, like MasterCard's been doing, bringing people into the financial system. In a lot of places, like everything about the environment, sustainable cities, climate change, we need new products, we need new technologies, and we don't even have the solutions yet. A lot of that innovation is going to come from the private sector. And so that's part of why I think it's so important to frame this not as yesterday's agenda, but the future agenda around figuring out where does that opportunity lie, how do we get the incentives in place so that a local business or a global business can feel the motivation, because they usually do, to get those products out there, or to get the right products, as Heather just said, in the supply chains, because that's so much of how business really works. I'm curious just on that front, Heather, I know many colleagues from embassies around the world are joining today, and to each of you, are there particular things that you would hope that people have in mind about how to bring business and other stakeholders into these conversations most constructively?
Well, I think it starts with an understanding that no longer does the official development assistance, the funding that governments provide, no longer is that in any way a majority of what we think of as flows into developing countries as development finance. understanding that deeply and understanding that to really get the impact that we need, to really have the scale that we want, we have to develop those partnerships. And certainly our embassies and our development and development professionals and diplomats, they do that, and they have to increasingly look to that as their solution, and they are. But I think we're going to develop those over time. We have to be coordinated. We have to be focused. We have a framework. We have goals. We've got to bring the governments into it in those countries and get them to bring their own resources to bear as well. So I think it's really integrating from sort of every step of the way our approach on the diplomacy and in the development implementation.
Can I just jump in real quick? Because I think what Heather and John, the question you raise is a really important one. You know, as multinational companies, we have an enormous ability to partner around the world with the embassies. And, you know, as the embassy audience listens in here, I would welcome an opportunity to co-host fora in countries, not only with the United States Embassy, but with other companies and other countries of these multinationals, because the employees who are employees who are engaging not only as citizens of this country, but citizens of their host countries, have an enormous appetite to be involved in these conversations. And I hope that the embassies can be a place where we can collectively convene around them.
Yeah. Great.
I mean, that leads in exactly to what I was going to say, is that we're very keen that the UN and that the world should have an opportunity annually to focus on the goals. And so we're kind of trying to call the week of the UN General Assembly the Global Goals Week. And we're producing quite a lot of films for that and trying to get the information about what's been achieved in a good form for that. So if, Heather, you could encourage, and if all the embassies could think about that week in September, from the 18th of September, when it's the Social Good Summit, right through to the Global Citizens Concert in New York, if people like pop music more than they do the internet, to have some occasion where the embassy hosts some kind of an event where they invite, you know, press, where they invite businesses, where they talk about the goals, where they show films, where they have a discussion in this universal agenda, because that would be an amazing sort of statement of the United States' interest and commitment to these things. And actually, it could be quite fun, quite interesting. NGOs, businesses, all those kind of things. We would be, anybody who wants to do that, we'd be happy to supply all kinds of materials and all kinds of content to make that. We can't do the catering. That'll have to be local.
That's
but
true.
We would love. I want to be excited and accountable. You know, see where we are in 2016, see where we are in 2017, make that a tradition, so that if that were possible, if we could make that, you know, Christmas for the world comes on September the 18th, we would love that and really want to be helpful and keen.
That's such an exciting idea.
Right. Well, hopefully we'll have.
We'll design the invite.
Although I would love to.
We'll get messages from whoever you want.
But I think we only have about 5 minutes left. We've talked about 5 minutes left. We've talked about so many issues. There a bit of an echo somewhere, but we have so many of these issues that are positive, exciting, expansive. I would maybe like to just take a moment, because a lot of people, I think, are still skeptical or wondering, you know, and each of us comes across different arguments as to why this is just putting labels to things that are already happening, or it's too complicated, too diluted. I think one of the things that's interesting, I was very involved with the early years of the Millennium Development Goals, and it took, I would argue, 5 years or so for people to really get organized. We're so far ahead of that, thanks to the work that everyone here has been doing. But I think there's still a lot of people who are wondering if they hear a naysayer, you know, what's your response? So I'm just curious, maybe we can go with each of you. If for those and people on the line who are probably, you know, confronting these questions, what do you say if someone says, you know, it's too big, too ugly, too messy, going to happen anyhow, you know, whatever the argument is?
Well, I think, John, that we've got to really provide leadership. When I think of the government response to that, it is about leadership and demonstrating our commitment here. And not just for the U.S., though we are taking steps for domestically, and we'll report on that, but really continuing to elevate these issues. The goals are hard. These are very very complicated goals to reach. And so we can't let that be an excuse for our attention to flag or for our diplomatic efforts to wane. And so I think that's a challenge, but that's also how I would answer someone who feels a bit skeptical about this. I'd say we have to demonstrate leadership, and we've seen leadership demonstrated by governments all around the world, and we've got to keep that up. I think the work that Richard and others are doing to keep the focus on the goals is critically important to that effort, and holding ourselves and the global community accountable is built into this framework, and so that's going to help us stay focused, and we need the leadership to get there.
Richard?
I mean, John, I think that the goals are actually the answer to skepticism. When I talk to young people, you know, and I'm a fundraiser, and they say, well, do the money that you raise, does it actually make a difference? Surely these are political problems. And then you sometimes say you're solving something, and they say, but the environmental issues are so huge, they're going to cut down all the advantages that you've made. And you say, well, wait a minute, the goals are the plan which actually allows for the complication of the world, which says let's really try and solve food in crisis issues, but let's also try and create equality in society which will stop that food being a problem. And then also let's make sure that the people in poor countries don't get all the advantages destroyed by environmental degradation. So I actually think that the complication of them is the answer to people's skepticism, and if we can all work together on all of them together and know that our work is unified, then that's a serious plan for the future rather than a kind of, you know, catchy top 10.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, I think that there are so many great movements happening around the world and so much need, obviously, and to the extent that this is a clear articulation of a world that we all want to live in. Like, I don't know that I have, at least in my lifetime, ever had an opportunity to be part of a solution in such a clear and big way. And so the world that we're living in is big and complicated, but for the first time, we have an articulated set of solutions that we can, at a minimum, at least look towards. And so to the extent that everybody is doing really great things in their space, I think the goals provide an opportunity to cut across the silos and find common ground that really does unite us not only as people, but as a community, a country, in the world. So for me, it's a pretty simple bridge to get there.
You know, it's interesting because even in my own talks, I mentioned this to Richard before, but if I ask a room, you know, what's the single most important issue the world faces, it doesn't take a very big room to get all 17 issues because everyone sees their own side of the puzzle. And I think part of what these goals represent is it's the biggest tent the world has ever seen. It's the first time the development community, the human rights community, the environment community, and the security community all have the same agenda. And that actually is a very expansive concept, but it's actually just an alignment of what people cared about anyhow. And then the other side of it that's very exciting and new and interesting is that these old divisions between developed and developing countries are less and less meaningful in today's world. Even the World Bank stopped reporting on, in its data, you know, developed versus developing countries. It is kind of each country's issues just take different forms in different places. So with that, maybe we can just ask each of you if you wanted to have one final phrase or word when you think about these goals that you think might capture the spirit that you'd want to leave people with, maybe what would that be? Heather, if you want to kick us off.
I think I'd go back to what I said earlier and say universal. These are universal goals. They are for the world, and that's what I want to leave people with.
Richard, we'll go on.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, all I would say is, you know, President Kennedy didn't say, let's get halfway to the moon and turn back. That'll be good enough. I think that so much progress has been made here that the idea is that we should finish the job and that there's actually a plan and determination to get, you know, and they got to the moon with some sticky tape and some Velcro. So I think that I just feel that to have a real possibility for a generation to make progress, this is the one plan that's on the table, and it's a good one.
And I would just say achievable. I think these things are achievable over the next 15 years. So let's get it done.
And I think those are all beautiful phrases and sentiments. And I think the bottom line we're taking away from this is a story that's yet to be written. Everyone online today, everyone who's in this together is part of writing the story. So it's up to us to figure out from each of our walks of life, whether it's from government, from business, from creative civil society, or even from a little think tank, each of us has a part to play in this. So please, everyone on the line, I'm sure, joins me in thanking our extraordinary panel today, Deputy Secretary Heather Higginbottom, leader of Project Everyone, Richard Curtis, and head of the MasterCard Center for Financial Inclusion, Shamina Singh. So thank you all so much. What an honor to be with you. What a terrific conversation, and look forward to partnering together on this for 15 years to come.
Yeah, let's all party together in the middle of September.
All right.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.